Welcome to FemLead, the podcast on female leadership and role models. Prepare to feel inspired and better equipped to navigate your career path. I am Alexandra Chabotaru, your host, and together with my guests, we will tackle a new field of work in each episode. The aim of this podcast is to deep dive into career perspectives and strategies to navigate your desired path for success. Enjoy! Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of FemLead. My next guest is a product management executive with 20 years of experience in building product teams and software. Yes, today is that day where we talk about product management. We will not only talk about product management, but together with my next guest, we will also tackle the topic of women and money. I cannot wait to share with you what we've discussed with my guest. She is currently a product management practice leader at Pivotal Labs, a division of VMware. She has been the chief product officer and head of product at startups in financial services and healthcare. Some of the organizations that she has worked with include the United States Space Force, Merrill Lynch, the Bank of New York Mellon, and PayPal. In this episode, we welcome Soumeya Benganem. Welcome, Soumeya. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Hi, Alexandra. How are you?
I'm very, very happy to have you here. I've had a long day, but I'm very grateful that I get to spend the end of the day with you and talking about product management and your amazing career. How are you today?
I'm doing well. It's Tuesday here and a sunny day in Washington, D.C. So nothing to complain about.
That sounds great. Great. You work in product management. We both work in product management. And I was very impressed by your profile. We talked on LinkedIn, and this is how we connected. I would want to start by telling everybody what is product management and how is this field developing in the last years? How has it developed, and how do you see it developing in the next years as well? Because it is something that becomes more and more popular. I know personally that a lot of people have written me about how do I get into product. So can you tell us what does product management mean and some ideas about trends in this industry?
Sure. So I want to start by saying that, most of my experience around product management has been in the technology space. So when I define it and talk about it, a lot of it is couched and uh, framed within what I know and understand about technology. I've been doing this for 18 years. I started as a project manager and an analyst and worked in many industries. And so I've been able to see the evolution of it. But if I was to define it today, I'm sure it's different than what I would have defined it even last year. But to me, today it's working tech- with high performing teams to create solutions for problems that our customers have. And that's like at a very high level what we do on a daily basis in product management. But then when it comes down to the reality of what activities do we do, who are the people we work with, that can vary from context or product to product or company to company.
What about your decision to move into product? 18 years ago, product management was not that well defined. And as you said, you started with project management. And in a lot of companies, the two fields are confused to a certain extent. So a lot of the tasks that the product manager can receive in the beginning, it's um, project management. And of course, that's part of some of the peculiarities of the role. But what would you say was the first memory of you deciding to go into product, and what are some of the insights into the role?
Sure. I think the first, like when it really clicked for me was when I was a manager at Ernst and Young, and my clients were looking at me not just as an advisor around how to implement technology, but also in the quote unquote business advice around what features to build, what solutions to deliver, and what problems to focus on. And for you to have that point of view, you don't just need to understand the technology, you actually need to understand your customer, you need to understand the problem deeply and focus on it. And when I say problem, That's like the also another name for it is a functional area. Another name for it is a business area, and so you're always trying to focus on one of those. When I was at Ernst and Young, my focus was mostly on financial services, and I worked within the regulatory space. So anti-money laundering, anti-fraud detection, and so your customer in that space is either regulators or customers. For example, your customers come in when you have to deal with a lot of false positives. So um, you know that created a situation for me where I had to think through who is truly my customer. Is it the regulator? Is it the customer? And there was a tension there that I had to create a point of view on, which is truly what a product manager does. They find areas of tension and they exploit them, of course, ethically and in a positive way to create business value.
I love your very optimistic and very nice definition of a product manager. I want to ask, as a continuation of this, how would you tell somebody who's thinking about going into product, how would you define the role as of what you're doing today? Now you are a product manager, management executive, and you've worked with different companies and numerous teams. How would you define this space to somebody who is completely new to it?
Um, I would define it as i- so there are two pieces to it. There is a personal interest in the space. So if you're really interested in this space, then you would have the things you would work on or like make sure you have are one, a sense of curiosity. So you don't assume you know the solution. You always want to dig in and understand what are the inefficiencies, what are the problems, what are the pain points that a customer or persona or people are facing. So you start with that mindset. If you have that mindset, I start by understanding the problem. I have a real curiosity for what humans are experiencing. And then from there, you move on to the solution space. And within the solution space, at least in the digital space, you're thinking about everything you've seen, you've experienced, everything that's available. Staying up to date around trends, understanding what is possible in that world, and like letting your imagination run wild into what is to be possible in the future. To me, those are all the kinds of personal thoughts a product manager would have. If someone is interested in moving to this space, there are also like tactics and techniques and technical expertise areas that are important, but they're not all equally important in all roles. So, for example, in some roles, data analytics is a really important part of the job. In others, it's not. So I don't have any hard and fast rules. I don't have any hard and fast rules about the actual techniques that you need to master as a product manager. But at a minimum, some knowledge of UX, user experience, knowledge of planning, understanding how to prioritize, and like synthesizing a lot of complex information, and then communicating your conclusions effectively so you can get your team to act on them. Because at the end of the day, your team of designers, engineers, marketers, data analysts, they don't really report to you. You're just one of them. But you need to have them focus and you need to have them deliver on a product that you all care about. And you need them to believe in your vision. So this is why communication is such an important, I think, skill for product managers.
For sure. Communication and over communication and writing everybody personally if you think they're not going to read that message because it's part of a list of notifications on Jira or who knows where. So if you
Yep.
want to make sure, send them a personal message and update them as well. You mentioned something earlier. You said high performing teams and managing high performing teams. This is a topic tackled in management and beyond. I want to ask, how do you create high performing teams? Why is this topic becoming so popular? Because obviously you are always aiming to hire the best people. But
Yep.
how do you create this synergy of high performing teams? What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. So here's the reality of the technology world. Everything is changing all the time. And so you don't want to really anchor yourself around the rigid frameworks of any kind. For example, I use lean agile methodology in my work, but I also sometimes don't use it. I use what works for the team in the situation, and I try to do what's right for the situation. But then there are certain things that as a team we can expect of each other because everything around us is changing. So, how do we create a locus of control that creates healthy dynamics for everyone? And for me, that starts with culture. And the first thing in that culture has to be a foundation of psychological safety. Everyone has to start from that place, like at a minimum if you cannot really do anything for your team or build with your team, let it be. If there is one thing, let it be psychological safety. And psychological safety, I think, is a word that you probably have seen come up again and again in topics of discussion. But everyone who has been it knows what it is. It's like a sense of trust. It's a sense of you can be vulnerable. It's a sense of you don't need to have an ego to get stuff done. It's a sense of everyone gets to have a say and share their opinion. And it's a sense of shared responsibility for the success and the outcomes that we all work together on. I can actually talk about psychological safety for hours. It is something very dear to me, and I think if you don't have it on your team, and you're not empowered or allowed or able to build it, then you are not in a team that will deliver well over the long run. It's not a generative team. And I think it's a psychologically exhausting team to be on. Um, Happy to talk even more about this topic, Alexandra, if you want me to go on.
I want to ask, how do you create psychological safety? And I want to add to that that in a lot of companies, if you ask the management, they would say that people are very happy here.
Yep.
But if you ask them personally, how do you feel? They can say that I fear I'm going to lose my job, that I fear that my boss will tell me that it's not enough, that I fear a colleague will look over and say, I'm not really satisfied with that. So, where is this miscommunication happening since we're emphasizing also on communication, right? How do you create psychological safety? Are there any steps or any mindsets to consider?
Yep, absolutely. So I think this is the promoting psychological safety has to start with everyone on the team, and it's not just words; it's also behaviors. What does that mean? For example, every product manager does weekly status or weekly planning sessions with their teams, with their engineers. Um, are your meetings silent? Are they the kind where one person speaks, one person shares their opinion, but no one else is offering counter opinions or asking probing questions? To me, like even at the team level, those are all warning signs. So if I was to like start from that place, like you are a new product manager to this team and you're trying to see if there is a sense of psychological safety, I would start by meeting with everyone on the team one on one, understanding what are their motivations, understanding what makes them tick, understanding what do they look at you as a product manager to provide, and then you also sharing your vision of how you think this team or a psychologically safe or a high performing team would operate. I think depending on the culture you go into, especially if so there is this Westrum's model that I use a lot and I reference a lot. Westrum as in Westrum. that talks about culture and fits it within three categories. There is either a pathological culture, a bureaucratic culture, or a generative culture. High performing teams, at least within the digital space, usually work in a generative culture. So if you come into a company and you find that you are within either a pathological one or a bureaucratic one, which are mostly power and rule oriented, then you need to be sensitive to that too. Because while your product team can build psychological safety within this bubble, it also has to interact with stakeholders and managers and other people who influence it who don't work within that same construct. So, as a product manager, first of all, understand where your organization falls in, and hopefully you were able to gather some of that through the interview process. And then understand how do you want to position your team in a way that you can still create that psychological safety for its performance and provide cover for it with the other parts of the organization. For example, like a very important part of psychological safety is to allow your team to take risks. And taking risks is very valuable when you're trying to experiment with different solutions or trying to validate different problems for a feature or feature set or a product. And so you need, as a product manager, to translate those proposals and those experiments that your team is coming up with in a way that's palatable to the rest of the organization. It is slightly exhausting for a product manager to have to deal with that cognitive dissonance that's created within the bubble that's your high performing team or generative team, and with a bureaucratic larger organization or pathological one. Um, but I have seen product managers do this well and thrive in it, and that's just by ensuring that everyone on your team is empowered to do the right thing, take number one, have shared responsibility, number two, trust that everyone on the team has their back. Number three, they believe in individual accountability still. And four, they are willing to take a risk, of course, a measurable risk. So those are a couple of the ideas and things that I have tried in the past in different contexts that have worked for me.
And when it comes to the remote work era, is there anything that stands out? Any advice that you would have for people who see this concept and implementing this concept harder due to the fact that you don't really meet people physically and you even onboard new teammates via different channels?
Yeah. So the good thing about the virtual nature of our work is that we're all playing on the same level playing field. Like all of us are virtual. So I don't think, there are like areas of inefficiency that someone can necessarily exploit. But if we're all working at the same, from the same place of a virtual world, I see that as an opportunity to find ways to do things differently and better. One of the things that I'm constantly experimenting with is how to create meaningful interactions with the team, either one on one or together, that are valuable in the moment and also afterwards. So, for example, one-on-one sessions that have an agenda around feedback, for example, like periodic feedback that people give to each other, so that you keep that culture of feedback and learning going, is a very important thing. One thing I do with my teams are these virtual speedbacks, which are, if you think about speed dating, it's basically a 5-minute session that uh, two people take, and it's 2.5 minutes, one person gives feedback, and then 2.5 minutes, the other person gives feedback. And you create that kind of space for everyone on the team so that there are no power, there are no power considerations or other things to worry about. Everyone on the team is going to participate, everyone is going to receive feedback, and everyone is going to have to give feedback. and it's a privilege that we care about each other and we want to contribute to each other's learning and giving each other feedback periodically every 4 weeks or so. And I think that's something that we have been able to do in the virtual world. There is a lot we're still experimenting with, especially around facilitation and creative problem solving. Um, I don't think we have arrived at the panacea or like the perfect solution yet. But I think with also the new tools that are being developed every day, we're just going to get better at it at this. So I would say, in terms of what to do in this virtual world, just continue experimenting. Use the same principles you used in the when we were co-located and working together, of spending time with each other and making it really quality time. Uh, Taking advantage of one-on-one um, meetings and interactions, and also exploiting the asynchronous communication tools like Slack that we have available to us.
And I'm very, very happy that you've mentioned one-on-ones, because if I could add something that I learned recently
Yep.
through the Women in Product conference that this year was online. So I joined it and I was one of the few European participants, as I could see. It was really a great experience. They shared there a framework called
Hmm.
DRIP: difficulties, anything that you are blocked or need help with, to mention it during the one-on-ones. Relationships, if there's anything about relationships in your team or with different stakeholders from the company that you feel need improvement, or where you will need some support or you would need some sponsorship. Identifying opportunities, are there any ideas or projects that you see that could in the future become important for the team or for the company? And lastly, promotions of people, projects, and ideas. If you want to bring something forward or mention something, or even help somebody with a nice mention because of their work. So I thought that was very nice to get out of the conference, because I personally didn't necessarily use a framework during my one-on-ones, and after joining that conference, I decided to do so, and everybody in the company was excited about it. The fact that we now have a framework that we all can use. So I thought that would be also interesting to give as feedback and advice if anybody is interested in
Yeah, I
following that.
love that. I think it's really important, especially for people early in their careers, to have frameworks to help them shape some of their interactions. I think over time, people will find exactly what works for them. But as a starting point, definitely drip is a great place to start with.
Hmm. I want to ask next, what is the biggest surprise of your career?
Biggest surprise. I I think a lot of my um, a lot many parts of my career, I can say, were a surprise even to me. Um, and some of it is because I've just taken chances on things that I hadn't necessarily set out to achieve or to do or experience. But if I was to look back, I would say my time at Remedy Health Media, a small startup, um, in the digital space with mostly an ad revenue supported model, was one of the most rewarding experiences I had. It was challenging, as most of the ad supported world is. Um, but there at Remedy, I got to meet some of the most interesting people who, like, they did not just stick to their roles. They might have one title, but they did so much more. And I loved seeing that spirit of, there's something broken. It doesn't matter if I am the COO. It doesn't matter if I am the marketing analyst. Let's just fix it. So I loved seeing that. Um, I think most of the surprises around, like I said, around my career have been also about the kinds of people I ended up working with and collaborating with, and definitely the Remedy Health Media work sticks in my mind. I started there in product management, and then I moved on to working on strategy and planning for the whole company, and I reported to the CEO, and I had a view into how to raise funding with investors. It just was a very fascinating place to work at.
That sounds really cool. And as a person who now works in a startup, I can tell you that it is still very exciting to be in this space where everybody's contributing to solving problems, and that's it. Let's just
Yeah.
find the best way and the most efficient way to solve problems. I
Yep.
would be curious to know now, in your role at VMware, is there something that sticks out, something that you've learned that maybe you think you can share with others? You now are an executive and you have, of course, an overview of how the business is growing. Is there anything that you would want to share with us about your current role?
So I think the business unit that I'm within, Map BU, there, and then there is a services component there, where we work with clients on building software and modernizing older software. Um, I think one of the best things for me, at least within this role, is this exposure to various industries where people just want to improve. Uh, Whether it's, like I said, building brand new software, or taking old software that has been around for a decade or more in some cases, and wanting to improve it. And that wanting to improve it comes not just from a place of reducing business costs, or other business driver. A lot of times it's about creating optimal customer experiences. So seeing this change and this shift overall in the industry that you see on one end, through it, the modernization of software, and on the other end through this shift towards a product mindset. um, I'm seeing more and more companies doing building around product teams rather than this is business and this is technology, which has the business versus technology dichotomy thing is no longer the way to do business. And so I'm seeing more of that, and it makes me really optimistic about the direction of our industries.
Mm. That sounds really cool. And I'm happy that you've also had this experience of getting to a place where you can have this overview and understanding different fields. It sounds really exciting. I would
Yeah.
love to go back and tell us more about who Soumeya is, more about your upbringing, and what are some of the maybe learnings that you've gotten from your upbringing throughout your life.
Sure. Um, so I think a lot of what we become as adults, especially later in life, is shaped by where we start from. I think I spent a good part of my 20s trying to not be that. And the older I've gotten, the more I've realized that a lot of the lessons that my parents were trying to teach me are actually important core values to me. But the ones that come to mind in terms of core values are, uh, when it came to my parents. They went through like an Algerian civil war. My father was a political dissident. He studied, for his PhD in Iowa, and then he traveled around the world teaching. He always has this sense of, he was the original Stoic for me. The sense of there is really nothing you can't overcome as long as you put your mind to it. Um, and for the longest time when I was younger, I started defining my achievement goals around things such as money and title, and um, the places I went to and the things I acquired. But in reality, it was really all about uh, something inside of me, like a sense of identity, a sense of self assurance, a sense of self love, and uh, the community I build around myself and the things I can give back to it. Um, I, I I think I spent a good part of my 20s really grappling with that and not finding the right answers where I was looking. And in my early 30s, I think I started understanding that it was all in me. And I think that's when I started doing better, uh, when it came to my community, when it came to people with me at work. I was able to actually be genuine and like have a lot of empathy for where people were coming from. And I was able to give advice that came from a place of um, authentic, uh, self knowledge. We all are different. We all have different dynamics that shape us. And I think if I was like back in my 20s, I thought there was one single career path. There was one single, there were these known milestones of achievement that I needed to go through. And on even people who worked in my teams at the time, that's the kind of advice that I gave them because that's what I believed. And I think that's not a healthy place to be in. Um, I think a lot of the companies we work with today have recognized that, and that's part of the reason why you see there are different career paths that people can take. Um, and I appreciate that. I think it's a recognition that we're all different. So those are the things that come to mind when I think about, what I thought, how I the things that I grew up with, how have they shaped where I am at today.
Very, very beautifully said. So thank you so much for sharing some of those learnings. I feel like in the professional space, maybe we don't share as much as we should about some of the life learnings that we've gotten and how that shaped who we became and the influence that we have now on our peers and colleagues and different teams that we work with, because we are all different, but we are there for the same purpose, and together it just works better. So
Yeah,
it's really important to work as a team no matter where you go, and let aside your ego or I don't know, all the ambitions, and really try to be there with your peers and build something stronger together. So thanks a lot for sharing those insights. It was very beautiful to hear.
my pleasure.
um, one of the topics that I wanted to talk to you, something that we came across in our intro call, was women and earnings. And for
Yeah,
that, we want to discuss for a few minutes the topic of women and how they refer to money in general. Because there is this, I don't know if I will call it a blockage or if just maybe shame of talking about how much money you make and what does that mean for your career, if you're happy with it, if you're not happy with it, what are your peers earning, and there's this stigma of discussing it. And there's also some sort of maybe misinterpretation of what happens if I ask for more money in an interview. So it's more about the value you give to yourself when you're, for example, negotiating or when you want a promotion and a salary bump.
yeah.
What are your thoughts on this topic that we've kind of came across before? And if you have any advice or any realizations about this topic that you would want to share with our listeners.
Sure. So I think about money, and again, this is another area that where I have evolved over time. But I think about money as a really important tool that I need to be able to live the life I want to live. And so I start from that place, and then the second thing that I think about is what is what does the market tell me about uh, the range of pay in my role? And I use range because I think that's more important than even average. Average. implies that there are many people above and many people below. And I think if you get an offer with an average, you should, uh, counter offer with or negotiate for higher. And so understanding the range is really important. Um, a, a couple of things when it comes to you know my so what I've seen over time, every single money conversation I've had in the workplace has been with men. In the space I am, it's mostly male dominated anyway. But I think we need to get over any hesitations around having money discussions. I'm talking about having money discussions with even our peers. So, talking to your peer about what do they make, or if they are comfortable. Like some people are comfortable sharing, and some people are not, and that's okay. It's the same as having a conversation around what are you having for lunch. Some people are comfortable in sharing, and some are not. And so I think you should treat money conversations in the same way. Don't be afraid to be shut down. Yes, some people will say they're not comfortable talking about it, but move on from that. Um, I encourage everyone to have money discussions with their peers, with their mentors, and with their managers. Um, a lot of companies now are creating more transparency around salaries and wages, or specifically for different bands or different positions. So ask for that and review that. And if you're not within the range, or you're lower on the range, ask for a raise. Um, Early in my career, actually, I ended up leaving a job over salary. It was during a review. During one of my reviews, I was told that I was excellent. I exceeded expectations, but I couldn't get a salary increase because I was already at the top of the range, and they could not give me anything higher unless I was promoted. And so I wouldn't recommend people quit over something like that, but the hypocrisy of the system and saying things like that to women especially should not be tolerated. And I encourage people to take different paths, to talk to HR, to talk to the head of your business unit about this if you're seeing it happening to you. Do not let money concerns or money inequity go, because it multiplies over time. So if in one role you're underpaid, you will probably be underpaid again in the next role. So make sure to take care of that proactively in every role you get.
And when preparing for a discussion like this, maybe we should also touch upon some topics to be aware of, or maybe sensitivities to be aware of, because it is super important to discuss it, but also the way you bring this topic on the table is very important. And I am going to give an example here that is very biased towards the way women discuss some topics, because there are situations where if you as a woman ask for something that's not as part of the deal or whatever was discussed before, you may be seen as greedy, versus if you are a male, you may be seen as a confident person.
Yep.
So let's discuss a bit this bias, and what do we recommend our female listeners who struggle with this, and maybe they've tried to get a salary raise and they were told no, but they also don't want to leave their job. What are some of the maybe sensitivities to consider when having these discussions?
Oh, I wish I had like the perfect answer for this, because as women, there are multiple other areas where we face this like double standard. One of them is also the fact that the majority of women are either seen as competent or as nice. Like you can't be both. Apologies. You cannot be likable and competent. It's something that only it happens only for women. And sometimes women do it to other women, and it's a reality we should all understand, and we should mindfully work on bringing down and dismantling. And if you think that you might unconsciously believe it, like, really work on it. I say that because a lot of these biases, even the most enlightened of us can might hold them. Uh, we grew up in a system that unconsciously, like, builds this stuff into us. Actually, and sometimes not just unconsciously, sometimes explicitly builds it into us through, let's say, the meritocracy system. And so we need to be very mindful about it. So that's the first thing I would say: start with yourself. Beyond that, when it comes to having these conversations, I think you have to use different techniques depending on the type of person you're talking to. There are some people who want to just see the data. You might have to prepare and do some research to get the data around what does this role pay, what does it look like in different companies that are similar to your company. Just get your data. People who like data like to ask, all the different exception questions. So get comfortable around what you collected and understand what are the different questions you get asked so you can have answers for them. I always like to, whenever I'm talking, proposing something, whether around a product um, like promotion or anything. If I'm advocating for anything, I like to think, what kind of questions can my audience ask me, and how can I prepare for that ahead? The second thing I would think about is sometimes data is not enough, and so you need to provide compelling arguments that can be qualitative in nature. So uh, it can be about your industry and how competitive the job market for your role is. There are 60 roles, or there is an increase of 20% in demand for your role, and over the past 10 months, you have improved your skills around these specific areas. For example, around marketing, you took multiple courses during your own time to just grow your skill there. And so, if you upskill, that should translate to a higher salary, because if they try to hire you now, you would just cost more. So those are some of, like, the qualitative arguments you might be able to come up with and think about. And then last but not least, if you have a counter offer, that always works. But I think that's very, very tricky. um, I'm one of the people who believes that if someone comes to me with an offer first thing, even before having any of the discussions around salary, it means they've already decided they want to leave and they're not interested in staying. And over time, I found the counter offer thing to not always be effective. Not as a tool that I use, but also as when people from my team use it as a negotiation tactic. For someone to get to the point where they want to leave, hopefully they would have already worked through multiple iterations and discussions. Um, yeah, so those are, like, some of the three things. I'd be happy to hear, Alexandra, if you have used other techniques or seen techniques that work.
Mm. I think the advice shared is invaluable. I'm so happy that we discussed this. Um, I would say that the negotiation technique with getting another offer sometimes can work because it differs from culture to culture. As you said, the mindset is that if you've already gotten through that entire process and you come up with an offer and you say, "Here is my offer to leave. Give me an offer to stay." Then you might consider it. Obviously, in some companies this works, and we can also be very frank about the fact that even if you ask for a raise, some managers would think, oh, she or he will never leave.
Yeah.
So they don't see you as a person that will actually leave the team for this reason, unless you show that you are really serious about it. But then again, you can also just decide that no matter what the manager says, you're already out the door, like you've made up your mind, and that's also fair. I think that generally women are having maybe more struggles in discussing money. And I know that me myself have had a very complicated relationship with money because I grew up in scarcity. So anything that offered money was just an achievement because I saw it as my work is valuable. So somebody is finally seeing that. However, I just graduated, and it's absolutely normal that while you go through a process of recruiting, you will get a proper salary for your qualifications, because I
Yeah.
already had a master's degree. And I remember how happy I was at the time that I got to this point in my life, but that was from another reason. So I would definitely suggest listeners who maybe have complicated relationships with money to understand also where does this come from, and whether there is something more that meets the eye about their relationship with generally money and a value driven work, to sum up with that, if I may.
Yeah. I think overall, anything that so we all grow up in one type of insecurity or another. There is such a thing as financial insecurity, and when you become an adult, you might try to make up for it in other way. There is emotional insecurity, there is intellectual insecurity. None of those means that you're actually lacking in any of that. It just is a feeling you grow up with, and then as an adult, you try to make up for it in so many ways. And I think taking that time, and to your point, like that, doing that self reflection to understand what's driving you to take certain actions that you might not necessarily agree with. You're like, why did I do that? You might find at the heart of a lot of those actions are insecurities that you have not come to terms with yet. And sometimes it just takes time to get there, and sometimes people can be more proactive in addressing them through therapy, through talking to people they trust, through a lot of self reflection. So I definitely appreciate that point.
Thank you so much, Sumaya. I want to ask you if you've ever had to go through challenging situations in your career, and I'm sure you had. But if we can be more on point of what were some challenging situations that you had to go through, and what did you learn from it? And it could be about a specific role, or maybe some learnings throughout your career overall.
Yeah. Um, I think the most challenging situations for me were really built around a mindset that I had at one point, that everything is a zero sum game. Like I either was a winner or a loser. When in reality, our world is more about collaboration, and like there's complexity. It's uh, i- the zero sum game is such an unhealthy mindset to have, and such a typical also mindset to have. Like when you grow up being competitive, um, if you don't have if you don't have a complex thinking, or if you're not thinking about the complexity of what competitiveness mean, you might like treat everything as either you are a winner or a loser. And so when I think back in my career, the most of the challenges I've had were around situations that I treated as either I'm going to win or I'm going to lose first, versus trying to find an answer that works for both me and the other party. And the other party can be the company, it can be another colleague, it can be my manager. And so having more of that long view, and more of the I have an I have empathy for where this person is coming from, and I need to spend more time to also help them understand where I'm coming from, um, are all things that I really had to learn over time. So that I face now I look at challenges as less of I am going to come out a winner or a loser, versus what is the best solution for this situation. And net net, there will be a win in it. some days one person wins, some days another person, but actually that doesn't matter. Like that actually that view is no longer valid or important.
That's very, very well said. And I can see that there's a lot of wisdom there as well. So you must have had some very deep realizations about the way that relationships work and interactions at work as well. Um, we're
Yeah.
getting close to the end, but I want to ask you two things. One, it would be about what advice do you have for those who want to follow your path, specifically if there's anything to consider when wanting to follow a path in product management.
Sure. So I think I didn't spend any time really talking about like the actual technical part of product management. I think for me, eh, I like the more senior I get, or the more work I do, the psychology and the mindful part of product management becomes even more important. But that's also because I feel like I have mastery now of a lot of the techniques and tools that are foundational to product management. Um, eh, but I'm also constantly learning. So, for example, right now I took on a role where I work on platform. Platform is essentially infrastructure or DevOps kind of stuff that deal with Kubernetes, deal with CIC, like continuous integration, continuous delivery, continuous assessment. This world, as someone who mostly worked on the app side, building applications for end users, that world is a black hole for me. But I was attracted to it exactly because of that, because it scared me a little, and it excited me because there is a 50-50 chance that I will learn so much more than I know right now. And so I think if you want to do better and better in product management, take on the roles that scare you, and try to improve your craft, and also your understanding of the human mind and the human emotion and like the psychology part. So on the craft side, the things that I think matter are data analytics, facilitation techniques, writing great user stories, and managing the backlog and the prioritization of what your product needs to look like. Um, coming up with uh, great outcomes that your team can work and and be motivated by, communicating effectively to different stakeholders and customers. Um, those are just a few. There are other things you might have to do as a product managers, things around building partnerships, identifying opportunities for that, coming up with pricing strategy. And those are things you can learn more about. You can take courses on. You can talk to mentors who are more than willing to share their knowledge with. Actually, that's one thing that matters to me a lot. Beyond talking to just product managers in my company, I also mentor other product managers or aspiring product managers that I find in different communities, or even social media. I think as product managers, we only get better by sharing more of our craft with others and helping others do better in this space. And then the last thing I would say around the craft, um, when it comes, for example, to marketing techniques, they they become stale really fast. The foundations are there, for example, foundations of A/B testing, but the tools and the channels, they can change very quickly. 3 years ago, no one used TikTok for marketing, as a channel. So just staying up to date on what's relevant, watching for trends, those are things as a product manager, they become really important really fast in this complex digital world we live in.
You couldn't have said it better. You mentioned so many pieces of, advice for people who want to look into product management or for people who look to gain more skills. And I'm very, very happy you covered so much. This was a fantastic discussion. And to sum up, I want to ask you lastly, if there is anything you wish you knew at the beginning of your career.
I think I spent a lot of my years early on thinking that I wasn't good enough. Um, and that basically kept tripping me up. Um, and so um, I think for a lot of the women out there, I want to say you're good enough. Um, it's not a matter of whether you're good enough or not. It's about finding the right fit, the company that's the right fit for you. And so, if there is, if you don't have the good fit, that's when that question becomes relevant. Don't make that question relevant. Keep searching for the company and the product and the team that's the right fit for you. You're just, you're perfect. You're more than enough. When I say the word perfect, perfect in your being, we always are improving. That doesn't take away from that. We're always are learning, we're evolving, and that's great. But yeah, focus on finding the right fit. And when you do, you'll see the biggest difference between where you were and where you are now. So that's my biggest. I think I wish someone had told me that when I started early in
Thank
my
you,
career.
Sumaya. So beautifully said and so true. Many times we feel like we don't fit the puzzle, but maybe that's just not our puzzle. Maybe we're not meant to be in a specific role because everybody else seems to want to be there. Maybe actually it's great that you don't fit into that story because it wouldn't be your story anyway, and you wouldn't feel at home. You wouldn't feel like you belong.
Yep.
So very, very nicely put. Thank you so much for your time. This has been a very insightful conversation on many topics, and I'm so grateful that our paths met because I think the listeners will find it very, very
I
interesting.
really appreciate your time, Alexandra. Thank you for making space for me, and I'm so happy I was able to have this conversation with you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I'm sure you've enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Stay tuned for more updates on interviews with amazing female role models, and remember to check us on all the social media channels. Thank you all. I hope you felt inspired to take charge of your next career move. Remember to review this podcast and share your comments. Thank you.